Hello everyone and welcome back to another beautiful day, another great day for learning, and another great day to cover the last instrument of the string series, the viola. 2 weeks ago we went over the violin, 2 weeks before that we did the cello, and 2 weeks before that we did the bass. This is going to be the last video to wrap up the characteristics of the individual string instruments, and after this we're going to delve into using them as a whole. Personally, I think the viola is one of the most underrated instruments out there. Despite not being as popular as the cello or the violin, the viola does have a lot of its own unique characteristics and qualities, as well as its own place in the orchestra. So it's important to still know the basics about it, learn the basics of the instrument, how to use it as a composer and as an orchestrator, so that you can learn to write effectively both for your strings and for your orchestra as a whole. So without further ado, here are the bare bone basics of the viola. To start, the viola is the alto instrument of the string choir, meaning it plays primarily in the very middle range of your piano roll. As it is an alto instrument, it's also written for primarily on the alto clef. However, if it is pairing with the violins, or if it's writing a very close harmony line with a violin, you can oftentimes see it written in treble clef. Similar to the violin, and very unlike the cello and the bass, the viola is also held up against the shoulder and played with the bow while it's held out, facing away from the musician. However, unlike the violin, it is a larger instrument, which is what allows it to play all those lower notes in its register. And if we are to compare the violin to the viola directly, there are a lot of key characteristics that are different that you will need to consider when writing out certain articulations, writing for the instrument in general, and learning how to use it effectively. A couple of the main differences, however, on the viola is that it has a heavier bow, thicker strings, and it is actually able to produce harmonics a lot more easily than on the violin. If we were to continue this comparison between the violin and the viola, as a lot of composers and orchestrators do, their tonal qualities present some very important differences in terms of how their strings interact with each other and what qualities they impart. The middle strings of your viola, which are tuned to G and D, are very dark in tone, as opposed to the strings on the violin, which are warm and gentle in the middle range. The middle range of your viola is very dark and is more often used for accompaniment because of this darker tone. Because of this expansive range of the viola covered by just this sort of general dark sound, it doesn't really shine a light on its melodic capabilities a lot because it just acts better as an accompaniment instrument. They do work great in their own solo pieces, however, they aren't quite as popular in this range due to the qualities it imparts. If you were to use this range of the viola on a solo piece or as the focal point of an orchestral piece, most likely the tone you would want to match with the other instruments is somber, haunting, dark, sort of that kind of mood. Not to say it can't impart other moods depending on what key you're using, what you're writing with. However, the strings themselves and the general timbre and mood that they impart is that of a darker sound. When you move down in tone on the viola to its lowest string, this darkness actually gets a lot heavier and it kind of shifts more into a tense or forbidding or eerie section of tone. The descriptions for these can sometimes be a bit subjective because it does matter what key you're writing in, it does matter the style of music you're working with. However, these ranges do impart, in most part, when heard by other composers and orchestrators, these sort of moods. It's kind of like a consensus of what everyone thinks this area of the instrument sounds like. So it's important to keep that in mind. You can use this range for something else. However, a lot of people will hear it and think, wow, that sounds a little dark, and it can add a little bit more character depending on how you use it. One example of something like this happening is, say you're hired to write a piece of music and the client who hired you is looking for something that is dark and forbidding. And while you might not personally find this range of this instrument to be necessarily dark and forbidding, you can use that section of this instrument because it is commonly recognized as being that and having that specific emotional quality. On the other end of the spectrum for the viola, which is this highest string, which is tuned to A, this string is usually found to be very powerful. It is similarly powerful as the G string on the violin. Very strong. It has a lot of drive to it. Composers will actually often pair this string of the viola with that low string on the violin to kind of give a lot of drive to a piece. Ostinato patterns are very common in this range, and stuff like that. It also pairs amazingly with other instruments because it has a lot of drive to it. It's very common that this part of the viola will be written and paired out with flutes, trumpets, oboes. As a composer, your standard 4-string viola is going to be the most common type of viola instrument you will have access to, but let's take a look at a very popular type of viola called Viola D'Amore. I probably butchered how that's pronounced, but here's how you spell it. This is a 6 to 7 string viola, very different from your standard 4-string. Along with those 6 to 7 main strings, it actually has 6 to 7 more accompanying steel strings that run below the main strings. This instrument, in my personal opinion, is actually the most beautiful string sound that I have ever experienced, even compared to the more richly sampled cellos or the more melodic violins. And personally, I find it a bit disappointing that such a beautiful sounding instrument does not have a detailed library of it available. And while the standard viola is not necessarily popular for solo pieces, the Viola D'Amore is an absolute fan favorite for solo pieces for its unique tone. If you haven't heard how this instrument sounds, I'm going to leave some videos in the description below that you can check out and listen to it. And if you personally watching this have any influence at all over a sample library company, please ask them to make one because I desperately want one. This instrument is actually such a rich sound, and it's truly one of those instruments that is lacking in the sample world. The viola is not quite as detailed as the violin because it is commonly used more as an accompanying piece. In fact, a lot of viola players will actually transition to violinists later on in their careers because it's not quite as popular, but it is still quite a crucial instrument that you need to be aware of. A lot of the same rules apply for the viola in terms of double stops and harmonics as they are on the violin, with the exception being that harmonics are much more easy to play on the viola than the violin due to the heavier strings and the thicker bow. But that's going to be the last little bit of detail I'm going to add for you guys. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I will see you guys next week. Enjoy your week. Bye-bye.